As they say nowadays, we need some backstory for that first reading. Because all during this season of Lent, or season of Easter, we've been reading from the book of Acts, but we haven't talked about the book of Acts. So we're going to do some backstory to get up, a little backstory to get up to this first reading where Paul is preaching in the synagogues, and he says, you know, I've started with the Jewish people, but they are not responding, so we're going to the Gentiles. So what's the backstory? So the church after the resurrection, the church is the brand new church. Our ancestors, the first generation of our Christian ancestors, after the resurrection, the church is at rest. And then something goes wrong. Right away, there's a challenge in the church. So you got two groups. Now at this point, of course, all the Christians are Jewish. But the trouble is there are two groups of the Jewish people in Jerusalem, Jewish Christians. One group is Hebrew speaking and the other is Greek speaking. So one is more leaning towards the traditional Judaism, and one has become part of the great cosmopolitan Greek world that surrounds the Mediterranean. So you got two groups. Now the problem is that the church has been supporting the widows. There's no social service net, of course, at this time, and so the church is taking care of its widows. The trouble is that the Greek-speaking Hebrews, they complain that it's not fair because the Hebrew-speaking widows are getting more stuff. And so this is the church, this is the brand new church of God right after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And already there's a controversy of just not fair. They're given more food to the Hebrew-speaking and then not to the Greek-speaking. And so the church has to rouse itself and it has to solve this problem. And it solves it in an ingenious way. It appoints a bunch of deacons to take care of the widows. But if we look at the names, it gives us the names of them. If we look at the names, they're all Greek names. So basically what the Hebrew-speaking Christians said is, if you think it's unfair, then you do the distribution, and then you'll know it's fair. They solved the problem. The church is at rest again. They solved it really well, very generously and open-heartedly. And so the church is now at rest again. Oh, trouble again. So then we have, by this time, the time that Paul has his conversion, we have two centers of the Christian world. We have Jerusalem, which is the center, obviously, of the Christian world, but there's now an alternative center. There's Antioch in what we now call Turkey. These are both great centers of the Christian world. Paul is converted in Antioch. He's from Antioch. And so now we've got two different centers of Christianity, and there's a little bit of there's a controversy. Because in Jerusalem, it's all centered around the 12 apostles who knew Jesus when he was alive in the flesh. And they are centered around the temple, and they're Hebrew speaking, and they are still keeping the Torah. And what they're saying is, if you want to be a Christian, you have to become Jewish first. If you're a man, you're going to be circumcised. You have to learn about the law. You have to keep the law. You have to become Jewish first, and then you can become a Christian. In Antioch, we've got Paul, which we now come to in our reading. Paul is out preaching in the synagogues, and he's not getting a lot of the Jewish people to respond to him. And so he says, okay, I'm going to the Gentiles. And so what are they telling the Gentiles in Antioch? You don't need to be Jewish. You don't need to be circumcised. You don't need to know about the law. You don't need the temple. You don't need any of that. You just need to believe in Jesus and be baptized. So there's a controversy. There's a struggle in the church between these two approaches. And it goes on for years, and it finally gets somewhat settled. Well, and we know it got settled, and we know it got settled because the most fundamental decision of the first generation of Christians probably saw more changes than any other generation of Christians, including us. And they made one absolutely fundamental decision because of their experience with the resurrected Jesus, which was, we hear the Good Shepherd whispering, the voice of the Good Shepherd telling us, this is not just going to be a Jewish religion. It's not just going to be a Jewish sect. It's going to be a worldwide religion that works for the transformation of the entire humanity to all people. So they make that decision. And Antioch, it's Paul and the Antioch church that are really pushing it. Peter comes along slowly, but it's Paul and the Antiochans. They're saying, oh, no, you don't need to become Jewish first. This is a worldwide religion for the transformation of everyone, every human being throughout the world. That's the most fundamental decision. And we know that decision is what our ancestors, what our Christian ancestors, we know that's their decision because we're sitting here today because we wouldn't be here if they hadn't made that decision. Christianity would be a little Jewish sect centered in Jerusalem. The only reason we're here is our ancestors made that decision. So now the church is at rest again. It has troubles, it rouses itself, and now it's at rest again. And guess what our life is like? This is what your life is like and my life is like, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'll bet you I'm not. We're resting. Things are fine. Something goes wrong. And then we have to get up and we have to sort of rouse our energy and we have to go and try to solve that problem. We're going to work at it and solve that problem. And then we get to rest again. And then something goes wrong again. And so now we have to get back up and we have to get going again. We have to apply ourselves and our intelligence and our energy. We have to try to correct the problem. We have to try to come up with a solution. We work for it. We get something, we get some kind of solution, and then we rest again. Trouble again. Now, isn't that what life is like? All right. And so our lives are not any different than our first generation of Christian ancestors. They're not any different. And our church is not any different. There are problems and then there are rest. There are problems and there are rest in our life. There are problems and trouble and then there's rest and then there's and we think, especially if we're young, we think, oh, I just want to rest. If God would just make life so I could rest. And then we get to be my age and a little older and people start talking about rest homes. And then resting doesn't sound so good. We could put some Haldol in your blood and you could rest 24/7. And all of a sudden, resting doesn't sound that great. And if you've been around people in rest homes, they want one thing more than anything else. They don't want to rest. They want to do something useful. They want to do something useful for somebody. That's what they want. They don't want to rest. And so we have this pattern of resting and struggle. And this is the gospel, this is the Sunday of the Good Shepherd. And so Jesus says that the sheep, and we are then the sheep, that we hear the voice of the Good Shepherd. We recognize his voice. Well, how are we going to recognize his voice in the midst of the struggles of life? How has the church always recognized the voice of Jesus, the shepherd, leading us on? How has the church always recognized that voice? Well, there are lots of ways, but we'll talk about one of them. Because life, the work of the soul in life in Christianity it's always been imagined as a struggle. It's this pattern of resting and then we have to do something. And then our Christian lives, the work of the soul of our lives is a struggle. But the trouble is there are two kinds of struggles. And if we're going to hear the voice of Jesus leading us through the struggles of life, we're going to have to listen for what are the struggles that Jesus is leading us into, and what are the struggles that he's saying get out of. So there are two kinds of struggles in the spiritual life. There are life-giving struggles and there are death-dealing struggles. There are struggles that give life to us. It's the struggles that people in rest homes want. Something useful, something to do that will cost something, but it will give more than it takes. And that's how we know a life-giving struggle. It gives more than it takes. And I'm sure I can see people who have I see Reen over there with her granddaughter, and I will bet you anything that sometimes taking care of a granddaughter is a struggle, but I will bet you it gives more than it takes. That's why you're here. And so, isn't raising our children, doesn't it cost everything? But doesn't it also give more than it takes? That's a life-giving struggle. And we know the death-dealing struggles of our lives because they cost more than they take. They take and they take and they give back stingy. And of course, the classic death-dealing struggle is some kind of an addiction, in which the addiction promises that it will give us everything. And at first it gives us a lot, and then it takes more and more, and then it takes more and more, and then it takes everything and it gives us nothing back. It is a death-dealing spiral. It's a struggle that just doesn't go anywhere but down, 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 down. And so if we're going to listen to the voice of the Good Shepherd, we have to listen to what struggles, what are the life-giving struggles that he's leading us into, and that he's saying, stay in that life-giving struggle. Because that one gives life. It doesn't only gives life to you, it gives life to your family, it gives life to your church, to your neighborhood, it gives life to your country, to your culture. It gives life to the whole world. That struggle is worth it because it's life-giving. It's the Spirit of God, the Spirit of God's life behind that. But this Good Shepherd is also whispering to us, get out of that struggle. Get out of the death-dealing ones. Get out of that one that promises that it will give more, but it always takes more and more and more than it gives, and is not giving life. It's sucking the life out of you. It's sucking the energy of your life out of you. Get out of those. Stay in the life-giving struggle. Get out of the death-dealing ones. So this is the Good Shepherd Sunday, when we celebrate the fact that the Good Shepherd, he speaks to us. He's out in front of us, calling us. That's one of the things they say about sheep is you can't drive them. You can't get behind them and drive them. You can't get behind them and use authority and power and violence to drive the sheep. They just scatter. The only way to get sheep to go anywhere is to get out in front of them and lead them, call them with a voice that knows their names, with an intimacy that calls them to safety and to a better life. And so that is what Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is doing for us. And one of the ways that we discern, where is that call? Where is his voice? It's about the life-giving struggles that he's calling us to stay in. And the death-dealing ones that he said, get out of those. That's not where eternal life is. So let's come to this altar and this table on this Good Shepherd Sunday. And let's receive holy food here to live a more holy life in which we can receive the strength to let go of the death-dealing struggles and receive the strength to stay in the life-giving ones.